Hello there, it's me. And we are today having a look at the orchestration, so aspects of Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope, 7M3, 8M1, the mouse robot, Arthur Morton, and the rescue, Al Woodbury, because it's sort of conjoined queue. So 7M3, the mouse robot by Morton, this is orchestration obviously, 8M1, the rescue by Woodbury. So yes, so basically I've kind of done the salient features that I think are the most important things for me personally, but also for viewers as well, listeners. So let's have a look at them, and I've kind of gone through a few of these. So bar 7, bar 40, I've got bar 52, bar 55, and then I've got bar 56, which is partly with bar 55 really, if you see what I mean, just because it overlaps, but there are sort of lots of different features about the same things. And then I've got bar 74 just to do with horns, when writing for 6 horns, but I'm going from either 3 or 4 notes to sort of either consistently 4 notes or sometimes 3 to 4 notes, but with the occasional doubling. So that's like a huge deep dive, which I've gone into ridiculous amounts of detail for, but I think sometimes that's warranted. So we're going to start off really by kind of flitting between different things. So the first thing is to have a look at the very, very beginning. We'll just go through it, and then when I've got something which is easier to explain with this, then we'll go to that. Otherwise, the other thing is I've also got the reduction as well. So if you've got access to that video, which you should have because it's all on the same thing, then you can also have a look at that as well. So the whole thing is sort of atonal, basically. And I've done a whole video about all of this. It's interesting, isn't it? Just, you know, visually you can see sort of low, some high strings, and then this spiky woodwind, which just picks out some of the notes, not necessarily all of them, but some of them from here as well. So as I said, not all of them, but some of them. So here, like that, in different sort of octaves as well. So we're going to look at all of that bar 7 in detail. But at the moment, I've shown how atonal it is, because if I put all of those things down, we've got a sort of really interesting sort of chromatic series of pitches, which are then sort of, you know, explored throughout. We've got some of these shaped chords, which is this sort of chordal perfect fourth, and then a sort of augmented fourth or diminished fifth. Those sorts of things. So that's 3/5. We've also got the familiar 3/3 going on as well, just so you can see that some of these sort of things can be to do with Williams's hand position on a piano rather than anything else. You know, it might be as seemingly random as that, but he's very careful to never really have 12 different pitches. It's never quite 12 tone, which I find really interesting. It's just super complex instead. Yes, I mean, we was not sure whether to include, but all of these pitches are different non-atonic subsets as well, which we know he has used actually in the first violin concerto. An author has done a brilliant job at highlighting the third mode of limited transposition by Messiaen as source pitch material for that particular piece, which was written just before A New Hope actually, so it could be that was through. So because we're dealing with orchestration, let's talk about it. We've got 3 flutes, third doubling alto and piccolo. We've got only 2 oboes, and that's true of the whole film. The second doubles as a core. 3 clarinets, the third doubles as a bass clarinet. In Phantom Menace, often he had an E-flat, high E-flat clarinet. 6 horns, 2 trombones in this particular one, 1 bass trombone and 2 tubas. Sometimes he has 3 trombones, 1 bass trombone and 2 tubas, but this is slightly fewer. Timpani, minimal percussion, 2 harps, piano and strings. Sometimes there are 2 keyboards in the original orchestration. Of course, in the live to picture version, you have 6 horns, but you don't necessarily have other things as well. I'm trying to work out why I haven't included trumpets there, because I'm pretty sure they're there. And yes, there are. So we've got 3 trumpets as well. So I will just adjust this particular thing. I'm not quite sure how I missed those out, but there we go. Sometimes he uses 4 in some cues, but this particular one apparently just uses 3. So let's sort of go through it. And this is a particular interesting melodic mix, melodic doubling at the unison. Clarinet with cor or with oboe. And that is so frequent as it's almost a sort of given. This is what it sounds like on Note Performer. And you'll see it's perfect range for the cor anglais as well. If it's written in transposing score, it's sort of all in the stave pretty much. Well, it is actually. So it looks right on the page, which is always a good sign for things like cor and any instrument, to be honest. And mixed, so the clarinet colours the cor and the cor colours covers the clarinet, and there's nothing else going on. It's one of those cues that just starts with a solo instrument, and then we got this sort of spiky, sort of droid-esque type sort of thing going on. And interestingly, that there are no violas in any of this, because we've got quite extremes in the strings. That's quite low, but goes high. And perhaps the viola doesn't really add anything to any of this. If you had the F sharp, does that unbalance things? If you double that, that's sort of below what's possible, and it goes beyond the second violin. So it could just be simply that doesn't work. And then you'll notice also a little clever bit here, just dealing with strings, because of the size of the double bass and the agility of it. These are very gnarly. That leap here. Pardon me. Which would be very, very awkward to do. So instead, you just sort of double at the unison. Like that as well. So that's what's happening there. The divisi is interesting because if you think about the shared note with the A, there's definitely an emphasis on that. But then again, it's quite common. Where it says non-divisi, that's super awkward because, of course, the E is a string. So basically, I'm not sure whether they would have done it divisi. I think they probably would have divided on that. Because otherwise you've got second finger possibly on the A and then first finger on the E flat, and it's a really awkward bit to get to. Well, not really awkward, but just a little bit awkward. Same with thirds, actually, on the viola as well. That might be sort of intonation issues. So I think sometimes when they do non-divisi, when it's not an open string, they tend to divide, but just don't tell the conductor. So that often happens, by the way, in sessions. They just find a way of doing something without causing problems in the session. So the next bit is this wind. And if you look at it, there are some shared notes. So we're not in transposing score, we're in C. That's what it sounds like. So it just picks out certain notes, and this is it in context. So it just adds a little bit of colour and flavouring, really, to whatever the pizzicato is doing. So that's its function. It's adding colour and flavouring. But what really is going on, let's have a look. So if we go here, we've got the two flutes, which are mid in the table, in the stave. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what it did there. I think I pressed 2 buttons. And we've got a unison pitch, which is shared by the clarinet here, clarinet 1 and flute 1. We've then got flute 2 on its own, which essentially is sort of flavouring this note. So there's a bit of some mixed unisons going on. So we have a mixture of flute and clarinet. We've got a mixture of flute 2 and violin. We've also got a semitonal relationship, which is the bassoon and the other violin 2 as well. All of this super quick. So then those notes are then flute 1, flute 2, clarinet 1, clarinet 2, so stacking. And they're not really sort of unison anything, but then they all end up on the C. So that's the clarinet and the bassoon. Of course, the flutes don't, because it would just go to a bottom C, which you just wouldn't be able to hear at all. But there is some perception that you do get flute here, although they're low. But look at the dynamic; it's only mezzo piano, so it's quite soft. And then ending up on this sort of augmented fourth, diminished fifth type interval, which he uses as a sort of a gnarly interval generally anyway, but with lots of unisons on the C that we get here, which land at the same time. Of course, that could just simply be written like that, but it's written like that. So some mixture of what's going on. This is all to do with the colouring and flavouring of things. Then we've got flute 1 and 2 both playing the B flats, which is then colouring the violin 1. And I think violin 2 as well, because they're now unison. So otherwise we've got some other sort of mixtures, which is where bassoon 2 comes in, because that's bassoon 2, bassoon 1. We've got clarinet 1. We've also got flute 1 and flute 2. Interestingly enough, is there anything else going on there? I'm wondering whether I've missed out one of those notes now, but I'm just double checking. So I've definitely got flute 1. That's definitely clarinet. Oh, it's just clarinet 1, of course. There's no clarinet 2 at this point at all. And then we've got some more mixture. So at this point, we've got the flute on the highest note. So there is something generally on the highest note. In fact, this one isn't. That's even higher. But here it is picking out the highest notes. But subtly, they're all sort of squished together. Quite sort of Stravinsky-esque, I would say. So the bass clarinet, that's a D flat. If I put it there, you can see that it's a D flat, which is sort of a mixture with that, with the double bass and the cello. We've also got the B flat, which is a mixture with the cello on its own. We've got that from here, so from the previous bar. We've got that here, and then we've got this here, and this here. So it's all stacked. There's no strange interlocking going on. With one exception, is that in this particular instance, we've got these notes here, which are actually played by the bassoon, and in fact that is actually played by the clarinet. So there's bassoon, clarinet, bassoon, bass clarinet. So bassoon, clarinet, bassoon, bass clarinet. And I will do a thing here just to make that abundantly clear, as clear as I can, as clear as mud. There we go. That's a bit better. So yeah, let's just try and move some of this around a bit. Always rather awkward with these sorts of sketch type sort of things. It takes quite a while to do. But anyway, you see that there is sort of stacking here, but then there's some mixed articulations and sort of interlocked is what I tend to call it. So bassoon, clarinet, bassoon, clarinet. And it just helps blend things together. So it's unsurprising that it is, because the whole purpose of it is as colouring of the strings. And then again, just on the wind. There we go. So yeah, sort of light colouring. So let's carry on. After that, we'll come back into bar 40. So let's keep going with everything up until that point. So then we have the very, very popular bit, which is kind of, I don't really need to explain because everything is separated out. We've got timp with sort of muffled snare. We've got all the trombones playing in unison, but with a straight mute, doing that sort of, this bit. Like that. And then I think I analysed all of those notes as well. Yeah, we've got sort of interesting things here going on, sort of set 515, then set 4Z15. So similar pitch interval content as well. So back to that diminished fifth, augmented fourth type sound. And again there. And similar stacking here. So in this point, we've got the augmented fourth and then the perfect fourth. So it's a 3-5. And then he's got a typical a 3-3 in the upper voice. So the particular types of hand position that he's using at that point to make it really gnarly. But that's about it. And then we just have sort of simple divisi strings after that, I think. Yeah, just notice that the way that they are in sixths, because it's so much easier to play. Although those might be played non-divisi actually, because they're very easy to do indeed. And indeed that would be as well, because you could have the open G if you wanted the open G. Sometimes people prefer it without open strings. In which case it would be divided, or third position, or other sorts of things. There are always ways round these sorts of things. But just notice the stacking, the interlocking rather. So that is just doubling at the octave, and then that's just a bass separated out. I don't think there's anything else there. No, there's not at that point. So we'll move on to the next section, which is in bar 18. And again, we have these sorts of long string bits, which I've pointed out before. It's a sort of D7 but with a sharp 5, so a sort of augmented D7 chord but with a C in the bass, with more of these trombones, and they sort of continue, and that sort of augmented type sort of thing keeps going with little bits of really nice voice leading, which I think is interesting. So that continues. Not much else I want to particularly talk about, I don't think, in terms of sort of doubling. One interesting thing here is 36. Let's just have a look at 36. So, I mean, of course, as patrons have access to all of this, you can just sort of go at this with your leisure. But let's have a quick look at this. So the bass clarinet is playing the same thing as the first bassoon at this point, because I've put it into concert pitch. It's as in normal, score in C basically. That is the same note as that. It just looks like a B double flat, but it's actually an A. So actually the bass clarinet is colouring the first bassoon. So there's that's the unison, but these are all triadic, basically. And then ending again on a little unison, which is similar to the end on a unison that we had there, and indeed at other points as well, this bit. So that's that little section at that point. Then we move on to the other bit, which is something else I wanted to talk about. Sorry, lost it. Here we go. Which is the main theme. So you'll see all of this is in unison. The only thing that is interesting is that notice that the oboes don't join right at the very, very beginning. They only join on the high note. And simply, it's just colour variation. That's all it is. And that is entirely melodic function with the strings as a harmonic function. Yeah, a total separation of function. There we go with that sort of ominous bit. So in terms of how the harmony fits in, the upper note doesn't go beyond the melody note. So we've got Ds here. We've got an E there, but there's still a D there. As it jumps to the D here, we move up to the F sharp. Notice that it's very carefully controlled. That doesn't go above the notes here, but we have a really interesting sort of chord. Something's not quite right type chord. That little flat 6 type of idea. No, typical sort of John Williams type of chord. And again, you know, nothing's going beyond that at this point. It's just a tone is the very, very maximum distance, or unison, of course. So minor third, major third, and then unison. Then we've got interesting sort of horn lines with harps doing this, and then a very interesting double bass trem, which is actually quite rare. Generally speaking, these days you tend not to, but it can be very effective at different dynamic levels. So here we go. Because it's sort of bubbling. Yeah. If it was less bubbly, you might have that as just non-trem at that point, and even the cellos as well. But I feel as though the whole thing is sort of bubbling up. And notice that the harps are just in unison. They're just playing a harmonic role. Which is just simply supporting the harmony here. With a change of chord at that point, and then melodic function just in the horns. So another complete separation. Yeah. So you get a sort of extraordinary clarity with that. Some French orchestrators might sort of balk slightly at total separation of sound. Sometimes there is an element of something that links them all, but not in this instance. And it's a particular type sort of Americana that it exhibits. Then we move on to really the end of the cue. So the only sort of really bit I want to deal with is right at the end. Which is, I think, bar 52. So I've got that up and running. So I've done a little reduction of bar 52. And it's basically what I call a piano pedal. Let's just move that down a bit. Oh, that's annoying. Let's just do that. And then I can just move the dynamics a little bit. There we go. So we've got, the equivalent of putting down a pedal. Like that. So you get this sort of cascade effect. I'm sure there's a technical word for it. I don't know what it is. but I just call it sort of either a cascade or a sort of piano pedal type sort of idea. Sustains, basically. So we've got two horns, which are, you know, four horns at the beginning. Two of them stay on the same note. The other two actually move to the next note, and then the other two start on that note, but then move up to the E. And exactly the same effect here. We have trumpet 2 and 3. One of the trumpets sustains, the other trumpet moves down to an A and sustains, and trumpet 1 moves from the A to the F. With a pedal just in, let's just get rid of that because that's silly. With a pedal just in the violins and also the cellos and double basses. Notice we've also got that, again, that little augmented fourth, diminished fifth idea as well. So common in this particular bit. It's almost as if the cue is about it, isn't it? It is. The other thing to bear in mind is that the chordal functions are separated out. So whatever chord it actually makes, which is here, sort of 3 levels of harmony. We've got F major, we've got C sharp minor, but then we've got this sort of dyad of G sharp and D as well at the same time. So it's sort of a little bit confusing as to what it actually would be. Like that. So it's a complex chord, basically a sort of quasi-bitonal or polytonal chord at that point. I don't think any sort of specific subsets that are going, but interesting that it is another non-atonic subset, so it could be a thing, but we're not sure. There's not really enough evidence for it, so I don't want to sort of just impose things on it, which there isn't. But that's interesting because the separation of chord is also orchestrated out as a separation of sounds. Just trumpets on the F, just horns on the C sharp minor, just strings on the G sharp, or upper strings on the G sharp, and just strings on the D, with the exception of the timp that joins the cellos. We then go into the next cue, which is Al Woodbury's bit at that edit point at bar 54, and we just get big tubas going on. So let's go through that. One minor thing is that with each of the notes that are picked out, we have some element of mixture. In other words, so not a total separation, because the harp is actually playing the first notes of all of the those brass. Like that. So at that point, we've got various things going on. Let's just deal with the bass line. So all of the bass line here, notice the double basses do go up beyond the stave into ledger line territory, whereas the tubas, who are less effective at doing that, don't. And even the trombone 2, or the sort of bass trombone, which is probably what that would be, doesn't either. Octave higher, though, we have the trombones. So the trombones are playing with the cellos, and the tubas are playing with the double bass. Like that, and you don't miss that tuba at all there, because of the power. As it goes higher, it gets louder and louder. We then have a G sharp pedal, which is just trumpets, with the emphasis on the middle note. So, you know, don't always be tempted to double the top note just because it's high. It will cut through anyway. So we actually want some middle there, because if you think about it, we've just got bass quite high, and the only other thing in the middle is just these little pizzicatos, which will be slightly pathetic compared with you know, how the trumpets cut through. It just simply, the pizzicato here is just adding a little bit of colour to those trumpets. So then we have interesting things going on in terms of brass. So what I've got here is that the brass here, the unison melody then breaks out into harmony. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So let's just play you this bit, and it's just the horns at this point, and nothing else is really... so it moves quite quickly. There is some element of mixture with the pizzicato strings. So I'm going to just play it, but just in viewers. So the strings maintain a sort of a link between the brass and sort of compositionally as well. But notice, so that's interesting. So we have an interesting balance of sounds here. So we don't have two Bs. We've only got one B. We've got two groups playing the G sharp. In fact, three groups playing the G sharp. We've got two groups playing the E. I guess we then have two groups playing the B, but it's just an octave lower. But what is going on? Well, and you'll see the mixture is interesting here. So we have a very similar combination of levels of weight to the sounds. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look at exactly what's going on. We've got horn 1 and 2, but only horn 1 plays that top note. Well, that was the same with the violin. We've got horn 2 and 3 playing the same note here, that G sharp. We've got horn 4 and 5 playing the root note, which is the E, because that's also horn 5, and then horn 6 playing that note, a bit like the cello does as well. So again, cello, do you see that the strings are identical to the way, the disposition, shall we say, of the horns? It remains the same, kind of, but we actually have a different note. So the only doubling here is, again, sort of in the middle of that tenor register. That tenor register seems to be a thing. So we then got horn 1, horn 3, horn 2, horn 4 and 5, horn 6 as well. And you'd probably find that again in the way this is done. In this case, it's just because we've got 4 instruments, so it's much easier to achieve. So that is what's going on with the horns. And we see that here I said the emphasis now on chordal function, burst, I think I mean first half of beat, is now in the middle of the register, but also happens to be the root and the third with fifths on the outside. So this is the root and that's the third. So the root and the third seem to have a bit of prominence to it, but we have fifths which are played in octaves. It then is immediately followed by the trumpets as well. And they're distributed interestingly as well with the trombones. This is how they sound. Okay. So, interesting enough, the first trumpet drops out. So it doesn't unison the G at that point, possibly because it's going to then overpower a little bit too much the trombones. So at the moment we've got sort of, 2 trumpets to 1 trombone. We've then got the first trumpet coming back in, which is then got lots of rest, so it can really punch that A and attack it with a marcato marking. Sort of a strong accented beat at that point. So if I break it down, which I have done, we've got an interesting sort of separation out of what's going on. So the first note is in the trumpets, a G minor chord. And this is what he does quite frequently. And then we got the E flat portion of that chord. So the whole chord is this one, but the trumpets play this part and the trombones play the E flat part. And that's a typical device, with the exception that the G is blended between the 2 groups, trombones and trumpets. We then have a slightly more blended chord with stacking. In other words, the trumpets are higher than the trombones. That's what I mean by stacking. So we've got trumpet 2 and 3, we've got trombone 1, trombone 2, trombone 3. So here the emphasis seems to be on the 5th of the chord, because we have essentially a sort of C major 7, but I've just called it a C with a B in the bass. Notice also the disposition of the strings are exactly identical to what's going on there. We just don't have 2 Gs at the top because we don't need them. Then what's happening here is we have an A flat major 9 chord, like that, but it's distributed like this. So we have the 7th of the chord in the trumpet, the 3rd and the 7th is doubled, the 5th, then the 9th, then the root, like that. Notice that in the cellos we actually have a C, which we don't have in here. Perhaps if he had an extra trombone he might have put that in there, but he doesn't. So often here there's a slight more sort of smudge effect in the strings because it works better. Because otherwise maybe there's undue emphasis placed on the C if you put the C in the second trombone, hence the reason why there's a B there. Again, there's more of a separation of chords, so it's just 7ths and 9ths, but there are no 7ths and 9ths here at all. All we've got is root, 5th and 9th at that point. Then there's a little bit more of an interesting voicing. So we have the root at the top here, and then the 5th, then the 3rd, but then now that's in the trombone, so more blended sound. Double the root, and then the major 7th is in there. And then an open sound just on that last semiquaver, and then we get that sort of D major chord with the C in the bass. So easier to play, you know, double tongue notes without changing position on the trombone, hence why they're just there. But same with the trumpet probably as well. Bum ba-dum. And then we have a melodic device at this point, but the harmony kind of remains very, very similar. That moves to that note, that's just repeated that note, that's moving up, that's moving up, that's moving up as well. Yeah, interesting how here we've got quite a closed position in all of those trombones, and then quite an open position in all of the trumpets at that point, which is to do really with register, I think, more than anything else. So let's have a look at that whole passage because it's quite fun. Yeah. We have a lot of separation at that point as well. So you'll notice that the strings are all sort of unison. Like that. We have a little bit of blend at that point. And tingle, and of course it's then appropriate to have tremolo triangle, like that, and then chordal function. Sorry, the wind are just sort of, you know, doubling whatever the strings are doing basically, but just more statically at that point. Yeah, basically. And kind of just filling in some of the registers. The middle of the register is all taken up by the horns and the trumpets as well, sort of that tenor register and then alto stroke soprano register at that point. It could be a mistake here. I've put an F there, but I wonder whether that's a mistake and it should be an A. But it could also be equally an F, because that's a typical sort of Williams chord. So I can't tell basically. But it could be because that's the next chord in the trombones, where you would unison all of those at that point. So 3 of them. So what's happening? We've got melody on the horns at that point. We've got basically our string unison, which is happening at the same time. Woodwind have cut out at this stage. We've then got all of the harmony, which is basically here, and kind of really in the strings as well. So that's all supporting that. And you can clearly hear, because they're not playing anything different to what we've just heard. So we have an interesting bit where there's some mix at this point. The mix is that the strings and the brass mix together, and their function is harmony. So there is some mix at this point, so a bit more French. And here, all Russian. Then we have the melodic function in the horns, but nothing else. Notice that the wind come up for a little bit of colour variation from the brass colour variation. So all of this is replicated in here. Again, I haven't sort of completely done all of this on the bits that I've done in short score, but just so we can hear it. Yeah, you can clearly see that that is a unison. So there's a bit of blend on that sort of subsidiary line. That's sort of a counter melody, basically. And, of course, the main thing is repeated. Then we've got more harmonic function. This time, the bassoons, contra, bass. We have harmonic function, and that's it. So here, low wind, and those low trumpets, notice, goes below the stave. And then the good bit of filigree in the wind. Hooray, filigree. And similar to here. So yeah, basically following the same idea. We've got sort of melody and harmony at the same time because it's all sort of it's all block chordal stuff. Like that. And a little trill. Then at 67, we have a sort of quasi-harmonic melody, if you see what I mean, because it's a melody which is block chordal harmonized. Like that. Typical sort of device. And then with the strings, still unison. And then here we have another separation out. So the colour changes with the orchestration. In other words, the motivic material changes and the orchestration changes with it at the same time. So it's a sort of clever concept. So less pernickety than the stuff that we've seen before. So let's just mix it all together. Yeah, so the point of showing you, I know you can't really see it, but you can see blocks of sound, harmony. unison melody, blocks of harmonic melody. A timpani on its own, suddenly harmony with bass line, filigree, wind and strings. These blocks, elemental blocks of sound, basically melody, but all in unison. All of the brass is playing the harmony, a separation of sound. And in fact, the horns sort of take a tuplet role from the strings, don't they? Because you can see that they take on a harmonic role, but it's sort of a harmonic role, but with using the triplets from the melodic role. This is a melodic role. And this is the harmonic role with melody. And counter melody. So the melody continues, but it's basically a bass line. Then we've also got the strings with that. So there's a huge amount of separation in this particular bit because it's all sort of coloured with different groups of instruments around the orchestra, which is really cool. So I am going to deal with these horns here. I know you can't see them yet, so let's just have a look in closer detail. So they start off with just dyads, or in fact just one note, and then you'll see that it's all block chordal harmony. Like that. So quite simple harmony, but quite interesting to have a look at in closer detail. And it's a typical example of good writing for 6 horns. So very, very similar to what we had before with the outer notes, which are just left alone. So the A at the top here, that is the 5th of the chord of D flat. So we got 1/5 on there. We then have 2 notes on the 3rd of the chord. We then have 2 notes, or 2 horns rather, on the root of the chord. That's horns 4 and 5. And then the 6th horn doubles that 5th as well. But notice that it's equal disposition. Again, very similar to what we had before. Then at this point, we then have 2 notes on the 5th. On the 5th. Then we have 1 note on the 3rd. We then have this note here with 2 horns, and then we then have the major 7th, which just has 1 horn. So there seems to be a preponderance on the root and the 5th, so perfect consonances, where we have this note like that. So the dissonant bits, or the bits that you would think needed more notes, actually is the reverse, is that thinking. In other words, the root has 2 horns on it, and the 5th has 2 horns on it as well. So the other notes have just 1. So I find that really intensely interesting. Then we move up to, so a completely similar thing to that. In fact, the B flat, or sort of E flat chord with a B flat in the bass, exactly the same chord, but transposed up 1 tone. Hence, we have exactly the same disposition of 1 note, or 1 horn on the top note, horns 2 and 3 on that note, which is the 3rd. On the root, we have also 2 horns, and then just 1 before. So it's interesting how, do you see how that I've done these lines here to show you how 2 horns in the middle go up to the top, then they go to the middle again, but notice 4 and 5 consistently playing the same pitches. And you get a really nice sort of strong continuity, like a real foundation in the middle of everything else. That's a real sort of Tchaikovsky thing to do. we've seen that sort of point of stability where you have sort of repetition. And indeed, even though the notes actually change on the bass, it's just still one of them on there, which I find, again, intensely interesting. So again, when we have the C but with the B in the bass, so another sort of major seventh chord but with the seventh in the bass, whoops. Again, it's a completely similar disposition to what we had here. So horns 1 and 3 on the top note, which is the fifth. Then the second horn, which plays the third, fourth and fifth play the root, one note plays the major seventh. So again, the root has 2 horns, the fifth has 2 horns. So the thinking is that perfect consonances, in other words, octaves, fifths, roots, have more horns on them, and the other notes don't. When it is equal, we have equal disposition. Root has 2 horns, albeit an octave apart, but they still have 2 on them. The third has 2 on them, and the fifth has 2 on them. So I find that exercise really valuable. It's very laborious and probably a bit boring, but I find it incredibly valuable because it gives you a real insight into the thinking behind how 6 horns orchestrates 3 chord notes and 4 note chords. So that is just that, and again in context, let's listen to how effective it is, even on just on Note Performer. Yeah, so another sort of colorization here, kind of. And I think that's pretty much it for most of it. Is there anything else that's particularly interesting? No, the cellos and the double basses are just a octave apart. We then get interesting sort of precursor for Imperial March. Yeah, actually that is something which is really interesting. So in the absence of the violins not playing this, because normally you would have all of that stuff in the violins, and in fact in the Leia theme they do play that, but in this case, whoops, going the wrong way, it's all horns, and it's just a way of orchestrating the same thing. But with long notes like that. And it's amazingly effective. I don't think I needed 3 stays for this. Like that, it's insanely loud where it shouldn't be. And then we have the melody elements on both oboes and both flutes. And no clarinets at that point. Notice the flutes sort of temper the height of the oboe in terms of the pitch and where it is. And then the harps basically colour the horns. So these are the horns. And these are the harps. Because just they have the harmonic role, nothing else is playing the harmony at that point. Again, orchestral separation of function, total separation of function, basically. We then have just strings on their own, which is this bit. A sort of playful sort of thing. So we have little bits of theme, which is trumpet. And then we have a little piano pedal bit, but taken by the horns. And it has a pedal function like that. And that's given to some violas as well, which is actually divided into 3, which is really interesting at this point. Let's just have a look at what notes they are. Yeah, so a non-committal, sort of perfect fourth, and then a dyad at the top, which is another sort of typical sort of treading water type device that Williams uses quite a lot. Yeah, I'll just sort of put E flat, but with a pedal. It's not quite as simple as that. Yeah, it's just B flat with a sort of sus2, basically. Yeah, with those sort of playful strings, which are just in unisons because we need them to be heard, so both violins on those. And then a different function at there. Notice that the second cello is playing the B flat here, so we get that pedal notes, which are kind of here. So both in the so the melody becomes the pedal at this point as well. With bass. And even the bass actually joins the pedal B flat as well. So there's an interesting change of function in this particular bit. But also notice how many B flats we have. Up until it then goes to D. So we basically have that whole sort of thing going on. The harp is just there for a little bit of colorization just at the beginning, just to sort of... So if I colour that, so there's a bit more colour at this point, little bits of mixed colours. And then we don't need the harps anymore because their function has been exhausted. And then right at the very, very end, we've then got unison D with a different bass. Like that. And then a sort of weird sort of bassoon moment as well at that point. So all sort of pedal type sort of functions and bass. And also I forgot the tam-tam right at the end as well. So that is the 7M3 8M1 Mouse, Robot and the Rescue, a deep dive into the orchestration of it. So I hope you've enjoyed it, just going through these sorts of things. Again, it's such a sort of valuable exercise to go into a huge deep dive. I never realised that with those sorts of major seventh type chords, to actually emphasise the perfect consonants is better than the other bits. I suppose it's all contextual, but you know, when they're on their own, okay, so now I know what to do. And it's just those little tidbits of information which can be quite useful. Of course, there are lots of other ways of doing things. You don't have to stick to it. But I think I probably will for the time being, up until somebody tells me off and says, no, you don't need to do that all the time. And of course, you know, there are so many different ways of blending 6 horns with 4 notes as well. That's not the only way. I've seen it done completely differently as well, especially in Empire Strikes Back, where often he has, or she, depending on who the orchestrator is, has 2 horns on the upper note and 2 horns on the lower note, leaving the middle, just with single horns at that point. So, yeah, that's kind of it. But nice to see the thinking behind everything when you deep dive into it. So I hope you enjoyed that one. I have, and I'll be back with another soon.